I want to actually ask you about the history of Hamas, if you could provide a little bit of that.
Hamas is obviously demonized. They've committed horrible atrocities on October 7th and long before that. But I think the basic problem is that there's sort of this sort of total dehumanization of anything and everything Hamas. These people are basically not treated as human beings, which of course ignores the many decades long history in which, first of all, Hamas, before it was a militant organization, was a charity organization. They got popular in the 70s and 80s because they were funding schools, providing after-school education, funding orphanages, health clinics. They were also had a lot of, women's empowerment and education and helping women find work. So it was a very, I would call it, and also obviously Islamic preaching, right? That was obviously a key piece of it. But it was charity work and Islamic preaching. And that was the case from 1973 until 1987. And there were some, basically they collected some arms in the mid 1980s, but it was basically a charity organization until late 1987. And what happened in 1987, as you well know, was the first uprising, was the first Intifada, in which between December 1987 and December 1988, the Israeli army enters Gaza and slaughters 142 Palestinians, most of them children. And then over the course of the next 4 years, from 1987 to 1991, they kill 706 Palestinians and suffer a few dozen casualties, mostly soldiers, whereas most of the Palestinians killed are civilians, and many of them are children, young children. So that's what happens. So what happens during the course of that period? Hamas expectedly experiences a kind of a radicalization, right? Violence breeds violence. If someone punches you in the face, what is your kind of knee-jerk reaction? Well, it's to punch back. That is kind of the nature of violence. It always has been, and it always will be. And that's exactly what happened. Israel came in, slaughtering, Palestinian children, breaking their bones by the order of Israeli defense minister at the time, Yitzhak Rabin. And then over the course of 1988, you have Hamas leaders. Mahmoud al-Zahar goes to Tel Aviv on June 1st, 1988, presents to then Israeli defense minister Yitzhak Rabin a proposal that says, announce your declaration, your intent to withdraw from the occupied territories, free Palestinian detainees, allow us to elect our own representatives, and we're open to peace. Obviously, this peace offer on June 1st, 1988 falls on deaf ears. Israel, over the previous 6 years, had tripled its settler population. In 6 years, it tripled its settler population. It was actively expanding its control over the Palestinian occupied territories. It had no intention of withdrawing from the territories. This offer falls on deaf ears. 2 months later, Hamas embraces violence in its August 1988 charter. But it's important to remember that even long after Hamas embraces violence, actually most of its targets are military targets. And again, human rights lawyers, international legal scholars debate this, but you do have the right to use violence to end a brutal military occupation
against commands.
And in fact, most of the targets from 1988 until 1994, so that 6-year period, basically most of the targets are military targets. There are a few attacks on civilians, but the majority, they're attacking soldiers, they're attacking military outposts. They kill the head of the Israeli police chief in Gaza. So they're going after Israeli military targets. And then what happens, in fact, the first attack on civilians comes in December 1990. 2 months after October 1990, when the Israeli police massacred 21 unarmed Palestinian protesters in Jerusalem. So you can tell that they are radicalizing and then they say when they kill, was it 3 workmen in Jaffa, 3 Israelis in Jaffa, civilians, when they kill them, they say this is a direct response to the slaughter of 21 Palestinian protesters in Jerusalem 2 months earlier. So they are moving further and further in the direction of violence consistently as a result, in response to Israeli grotesque violence from 88 to 94. And then what happens in 94 is that you get the American Brooklynite, Baruch Goldstein, enters the Ibrahimi Mosque in Hebron and slaughters 29 unarmed Palestinian worshippers on Ramadan. Okay. And this, this leads to the ultimate kind of turn in Hamas. And then from 94 to 2005, they kill more than 1,000 Israeli civilians in all of these gruesome attacks that everyone knows about. But it's not until 96 they even get put on the U.S. terrorism watch list, right? So it's a very gradual transition from charity work and Islamic preaching to violence. And then again, and then I think by the end of the Second Intifada, after they win legislative elections, they win the January 2006 Palestinian legislative elections. There's again this return to this. You have Ismail Haniyeh published a piece in The Guardian basically saying, treat us as equals, we're open to peace. Khalid Mash'al says the same thing in a CNN interview in 2007. So they're basically talking about resolving the conflict on the June 1967 borders with the capital in East Jerusalem and the return of the Palestinian refugees. And they're very open about that in 2006, 7, and 8. But essentially what happens is Israel prefers a policy of strategic deterrence, of mowing the lawn, as it describes Palestinians as overgrown grass. And that's terminology used inside Israel very nonchalantly to liken Palestinians to overgrown weeds. But that is basically what the strategy is. And by the mid-2010s, the Israeli right has been in power for 5, 6, 7 years. And now they're open, and Ben Gvir actually tweets out in 2017, Hamas is our asset and the Palestinian Authority is our liability. And Bibi Netanyahu says the same thing to his Likud party in 2019, based on this idea that when your enemies are divided rather than united, they're more easy to defeat. We don't have to negotiate with the Palestinians. We don't have to make any sacrifices. We don't have to give back any land. We can continue to expand the settlement enterprise, conquer more, destroy more Palestinian homes, destroy more Palestinian olive groves, take over more land for more Jews. Because we don't have to negotiate them because they're terrorists, right? Because Hamas, and that was the strategy, was keep Hamas in power, let Qatari bring suitcases full of cash into Gaza, keep them in power but weak. Every few years, mow the lawn, kill a few Hamas leaders, make sure that they don't have sufficient military capacity to actually carry out any serious attacks on Israel, because a few rockets here and there don't actually matter. We don't actually care about the people of Sderot. They're just sort of pawns in the great game. And ultimately Tel Aviv is safe, Jerusalem safe. We don't have to worry about Hamas. And obviously that logic proved to be quite fatal.